try!
Yeah, thanks. As Mick said, the special general meeting will be on at 2 p.m. here on the 20th, but also I can announce today that in consultation with the Players Association, we've also lifted the moratorium on contracting, so that obviously teams are now free to contract. So on that note, I'm happy to open to questions.
Will you have a decision on which team you're cutting at that meeting?
Well, we're certainly hopeful that the process, that we announced back in April will come to a conclusion at some point. I can't obviously predict then when that'll be. I mean, a lot of elements of this are outside of our control. When we were contemplating a change in the format of the competition, the desire from most of the teams was if you do arrive at that point and make a decision to change the structure of the competition, make a decision quickly. When we made the announcement, that was certainly our intention. We said, well, based on that desire, we'll consult and we'll make the announcement within 48 to 72 hours. Obviously, when we made the announcement, teams changed their view, and in fact, commenced legal action that very day. So, they're entitled to do that. That was contrary to, I guess, the indications they given us earlier. And obviously, when you've got that process, it takes time. We don't control, all the things. I mean, this special general meeting is a great example. We said we'd rather have the meeting last week. Let's have it meeting, anything you want to see, you can see. They'd like to go down a formal process which takes 21 days notice. So, I mean, again, that's a process that's really outside our control, which unfortunately just adds to the delay, which we really, understand players and fans don't accept, and we understand that, and that's not acceptable.
Can you understand why these clubs are putting up a fight?
Well, yeah, I mean, they obviously, are there to fight them. That's not, the indication is, though, that the game, we've made it quite clear that we think the game is not financially sustainable. The interesting thing is that there's been a long-term trend over the last couple of years of declines in crowds. That's continued this year. That's not about uncertainty. That's actually the continuation of a long-term trend. And even the teams that are under threat, or speculated as being under threat, we've said which teams obviously that are being considered. They've not had the crowds there either. So we've got to take, I know there's a lot of emotion and passion around this, but we've got to strip that back and say the game is struggling. I know it is really disappointing to players and fans that it's taking so long, but we've also got to consider if we don't have a financially sustainable competition, that is not in the interest of players or fans in going forward in the future, and that's what obviously we're concerned about as well.
So what are the options? What do you think changed with the teams, from that? Was it that they weren't expecting to be the ones in the line?
Look, my suspicion is that the teams actually never thought this would actually come about. I mean, we have talked for many years at the RU about the challenge of the financial game. We've indicated that in the last 10 years we've had to provide financial assistance on no less than 10 occasions. In the last 4 years, the Super Rugby tier of the game we've spent 28 million over and above the budget of what we were spending. So we've continually highlighted this is not sustainable. I made the point about the long-term crowd issues. I suspected, or my suspicion is that they felt that we've talked that, but we'd never actually go down that path. And I think obviously there was, indications before our announcement on the 10th of April that yes, look, if you do make that decision, go quickly. I think when it became a reality, then obviously I think their view changed. They're entitled to change that view, but obviously that puts a lot of delay into the process.
So how long do you think this process will last now, Cameron, based on this June 20 meeting?
We're doing everything we can to push it forward. I mean, I gave the example when there was a desire for a special general meeting. And by the way, that's a desire, there's two parties that want that. A lot of members don't want that special general meeting because they just see it as delay. We're trying to move it forward. We said, let's meet, let's meet tomorrow, we made ourselves as available as we could to do the meeting. We certainly indicated we'd provide everything they wanted through a special general meeting, but, those delays are unfortunate. I don't know. We're going to do everything we can to keep pushing the thing forward and get this resolved as quickly as we can, but we don't control all the pieces, unfortunately.
What are the major roadblocks to making Cummins' decision, and how are you going to remove them if neither side yields?
Well, we'll just have to continue down. We're obviously, involved in dialogue with both parties. We'll just have to continue down that process. We can't say too much about that at the moment, but we will continue to try and move the process forward as fast as we possibly can, subject to the other parties.
There's obviously the two teams. There's one. Have you got your eye on which team you're going to kick out yet?
No. Look, we made an announcement on the 10th of April, we indicated at that point in time that the dialogue we were maintaining with two teams was the Western Force and the Melbourne Rebels. We're still in dialogue with those teams. We indicated at that point in time that the Brumbies were not in consideration. I might just address, there's been a lot of speculation around, well, why was that decision made and why wasn't, say, for example, a Brumbies-Rebels merger considered? For a couple of reasons. First of all, the Brumbies have been our most successful franchise and have a very well-established high-performance pathway and also very strong links into the community there. And they've actually been the franchise that has had the least call on the AU from a financial perspective. So they've actually had the greatest degree of sustainability. So that was one reason that the Brumbies actually did pass a threshold. With regard to the merger, mergers have been mixed in sporting situations. They generally have alienated both sets of fans, and we're trying to avoid that. Where mergers have been moderately successful has been geographic proximity. Teams coming together where they may have bordered each other. That's not the case in this situation. So when we looked at it both from the historic sustainability of the Brumbies and their on-field performance and the fact that they've been the least financially requiring of AU assistance, and the fact that a merger was not an outcome was good, we obviously indicated they were not part of the process. Obviously, with the other teams, we maintain a dialogue. I would also say, just in the sort of trying to clear up, I mean, one of the things, we've have been remiss in communicating because obviously, we're given legal advice always not to communicate. That's actually how it normally works. It doesn't work this way in sport, obviously, but and not everyone's necessarily observed that communication, that confidentiality, and I think that's left a lot of erroneous information out there. So I think what we're trying to do today is start a process saying, look, we've got to get out there and say it. I know there are obviously, challenges in what we can say, but we can't allow some things to stand out there. I mean, one, there's been speculation that we're banding extraordinary amounts of money around to buy Super Rugby franchises. I mean, that's just utter nonsense. If we had that sort of money, we wouldn't be in this situation. We're in this to save money. We negotiated an outcome where we want to put more money back into grassroots. So we're not in the position just saying if we had the sort of money people are speculating to buy licences, we most certainly wouldn't be in this financial situation. This is about returning money from a tier of rugby that is running at a very expensive level to where we're underinvesting in coaching, juniors, schools, club rugby.
So how much contact have you had with the Rebels and the Force since you announced one of them would be cut?
We've been in constant dialogue with both teams.
Several players have been very critical of the AU. One, is it warranted? And two, what have you got to say to them?
Look, I can fully understand the frustration of the players. We don't want this process to drag on any longer than it needs to be. I would say, first of all, we've indicated that if the process does result in a team leaving the competition, all player contracts will be honoured. We've said that right from day one. That'll be absolutely the case. We're not now. I know there might be uncertainty for a group of players that if a team does end up not being part of the competition. That short-term uncertainty has to be weighed off against the long-term uncertainty of the sustainability of the Super Rugby franchise. It would be far worse to have a situation where these franchises collapse, as has been the risk in the past due to financial issues. That's far more concerning to the players long-term. And so we are concerned about that. We also, we have been engaging with a lot of people over this process and getting a lot of feedback from fans. There's also a genuine concern that there are other players who are suffering from this, and they're the players that we haven't been investing in. We're not investing sufficiently in junior rugby, schools rugby, club rugby, women's rugby, those sort of things. We've got to weigh that up. This is a difficult choice because of financial circumstances. So we want to bring it to the end as quickly as we can for those players. I understand their concern, but the AU's got to consider all aspects of the game, and we just don't think it's also in the players' interests to have the financial uncertainty hanging over them either. And if we can bring this to a head as quickly as possible, that certainty will be over and we can get the game on a better financial footing. What kind of impact do you think lifting the moratorium is going to have, even potentially financially, if all those contracts then have to be honoured? Well, I mean, we obviously recognise that we'll have to honour those contracts, and that's what we intend to do. We want players to have at least that certainty that they sign a contract, and obviously we'll go down a process if they do sign a contract and they end up in a team, or it's not just ending up in a team, but they may not want to participate in that team. We'll honour that and we'll work that through, and we'll work through things like early releases. So we're trying to give as much certainty for that, and that's why in consultation with RIP we've ended that moratorium. But I think the best we can do in terms of certainty is to say to players that, look, no matter what the outcome, you're going to have the certainty of having your contract on it. So you're not going to be in a situation where you won't have that level of uncertainty.
Are you concerned though that you might have players like Dane Halapetty's been thrown around as someone who might be sitting in Perth next year on a contract but not actually playing Super Rugby?
Well, look, I mean, there's inevitably when you go down this situation, there are going to be consequences. I mean, we've never indicated that would be the case, but you're weighing up the consequences. The status quo is simply not a viable option in the sense that, if you look at the amount of money that's going into that tier of rugby and it's not generating the return, then that is having a consequence on other tiers of the game that are not being invested in. So I think that's the challenge we're weighing off. I mean, look, there may be players in that situation, but they'll have contracts and those contracts will be honoured, and I guess it's up to them to make a determination around whether they want to play with another franchise or seek an early release, and it will be as accommodating as possible around that situation.
At the EGM, are you prepared for any potential challenge from the board should that happen?
Oh, look, I mean, that's not one of the items that people have raised at the moment, and certainly they put out what they've requested, and they said they're looking obviously for some further information on the decision process, and we said we were happy to provide that last week, but let's wait 21 days if that's what people want to do. Certainly what we want to do, but if they want to do it, that's great. In terms of that, I mean, the majority of members have indicated they're supportive of the path we're taking. They understand it's difficult. They also, I mean, each of the franchises is not just, each franchise is looking down their own financial challenges. They understand why we're going down this path, and they've indicated on a number of occasions throughout the process they're supportive of the process we're going down. Of course, they're free to change their mind if they change that, and that's absolutely fine if they seek to.
Sorry, Cameron, is it possible that this could actually cost you more getting rid of a team than culling a team, given the sort of legal situation that's going on?
No, look, we indicated that the key, up until we made the announcement on April the 10th, there had been obviously speculation, and we had been through obviously a planning process with SANZAR around what the future construct of the competition could be. And part of that construct was obviously to say that we wanted to, bring more meaning back into the competition, get it closer to, I guess, integrity with things like most teams playing each other once and those sort of things, which a 15-team competition will do. It also works well with the change coming up in 2020 with the global playing season. It allows us to have the whole competition played from end to end. That's a big factor because obviously the June break has not been helpful for anyone. Up until that point, one of the key criteria was that, we obviously wanted to look at the opportunity of restructuring the Australian teams, but unless you're in a position where you could save money, the goal was to say, look, we need to save money and redirect those savings to other tiers. So any scenarios we've been looking at are firmly oriented around redirecting money to other tiers of rugby. So any of the sort of speculation that we're going down paths that are going to be hugely expensive, that's not a path we're prepared to take because it actually defeats the purpose of actually redirecting the money into. So we're not considering, and that's why sort of speculation that we're banding around extraordinary sums of money. That's just totally contrary to the objective we're doing. If we had that sort of money to bandy around, we wouldn't be going down this process.
Are you concerned this could drag on to next year? Like, what's the deadline?
Oh, look, I mean, all I can say is we will continue to be as diligent as possible about trying to bring it to a close. We don't control all the pieces. I think, it's hard to say when it will end. I mean, but all we can do is make ourselves as available as possible to get this resolved as quickly as possible.
What kind of impact do you think it'll have on the test series? I mean, it's coming. This meeting will be 4 days before the last test as well. Yeah,
look, I don't want to sort of comment on certainly what the degree will have an impact on. I mean, I think that's something that's probably better directed to the coaching staff. I think the reality is that most of the fans are excited about the upcoming Test series and want to see more talk, as we do, want to see more talk about rugby as opposed to this issue. So hopefully what we'll see when we get June 10 when we roll against Fiji and Melbourne, that we'll see people talking about rugby.
Was there a consideration that of maybe having it just a week later after the test were done?
We think anything we can do to cut the delay. We want to do. We're trying to they want to go down a formal process. That's fine. That's their right. But why push it out further? Let's just keep this thing moving and try and get to resolution.
Do you think this could have been dealt with better by the AIU?
Well, yeah, look, in hindsight, we'll obviously consider that, but I think we're operating under the assumption that, we've seen a long-term decline in, the financial viability of the game. We indicated, we received indications from franchises that if a decision was made to do it quickly, we made an announcement to do it quickly, legal action was commenced that day. Could we have anticipated there would have commenced legal action? Well, perhaps yes, but, you're also operating on the assumption that, most of the franchises, in fact, all of the franchises are supportive of the direction we're going down. They just don't want to be the team that goes. So, I think that makes it difficult as well. So, if everyone's prepared to down tools and say, in the interest of rugby, make a call, we'll make a call this afternoon, I'll get the board in here and we'll be done tonight. That unfortunately not going to happen. We're going to have teams that want to fight. But we've got to say, well, the reality is we're in this position because, and I think one of the disappointing things has been, there are individuals who are now critical of the RU process, but they are actually individuals that have generated some of the problems that are in to date in terms of financial outcomes, and that's just not sustainable. We can't continue that process.
Is there any possibility in your mind at all that there might be 5 Australian Super Rugby teams playing next season?
We're still working to our announcement that we made on our intention is to go down a process of working towards 4 teams as we made in our announcement.
So there is a possibility that there could be 5.
We're still. That's not our intention. We're just working towards the process we announced, and we haven't changed our view on that. But there is a process we're going down.
Have you given any assurances to Sanzar that you will be? I mean, I presume you did before the announcement, but of late that there will be 4 teams.
No, we're obviously in regular dialogue with Sanzar. I mean, one of the processes here, of course, is that at the time we made our announcement of our intention to work through a process which may result in a team exiting, South Africa made an announcement of 2 teams. So we have been obviously regular dialogue around how they're going as well, and they've certainly, from their indications, I don't want to comment too much on their process, but they are still committed to their announcement of actually going down from 6 teams to 4, and we just provide regular updates and discussion with Sanzar.
If Andrew Cox is not going to sell the licence or give it back, are you guys in any position to wind up the Rebels?
We're not. I'm not going to sort of comment on specifics. Just say that we're obviously maintaining a dialogue with both teams.
So the Rebels are still.
We're maintaining a dialogue with both teams. Yep.
Could there be any situation where you were forced into a situation where you can't actually cut one of those 2 teams?
Oh, look. I mean, at this stage, we're still working down a process. We remain confident, that will result in the process coming to a potential change. But it's hard to speculate. I mean. Every roadblock that can be thrown in front is being thrown. So,
are you concerned though legally they might, have a case that they can't be kicked out? There might be, certain contractual agreements in place.
Oh, look, I mean, there's, when you get into a legal process, it all becomes difficult. But we just, as I said, we're going down that process, and we're hopefully, and we'll make ourselves as available as possible to try and get it resolved as quickly as possible.
Just on the contracting thing, into next year, is there any chance of changing the salary cap to absorb those extra players if
Oh well, I mean, I think. Look, I mean, in many respects, what we're very mindful of is the long-term sustainability of rugby. Part of it's financial, but in many respects, and I think this is one of the challenges. This is sort of a step in a process, because I think a lot of things need to be considered. I think we certainly feel that maybe some consideration needs to be given to how you accommodate those players, but I think we need to further work with each of the franchises on greater coordination. Which is something that's really important. So we've actually got greater alignment of things like high performance objectives, greater investment in coaching and those sort of things. So there's a lot to be done. I mean, this is about about financial sustainability in the short term, but it's also about in long-term financial sustainability, about lifting the performance of Australian rugby. And part of that is going to require more work even after this on things like coordination and centralisation of some activities, as well as looking at things like how we accommodate potentially larger pool of players in a number of franchises that we have.
Just honouring the contracts, how much would that cost the ARU? Have you got a figure yet?
That will depend. I mean, that will depend on where we end up. But we've given a clear commitment that we know there's uncertainty for players. I must say though that there has been concern expressed to us in the past from players around the solvency of the franchises they play for. So, I mean, they are aware of the issues. I mean, I fully understand the current uncertainty, but and that's why we're very concerned about this long-term issue, because we've generally had quite serious representations from players in the past saying, look, worried about, and we've talked about the number of times we've had to provide financial assistance. So they do understand, this issue of financial sustainability, but what that will cost. But we've been obviously factoring those sort of things in, and all you can do is to try and minimise that uncertainty, to give them that at least level of assurance that your contracts will be honoured.
And do you, now players will start negotiating for the Force and the Rebels, and then that franchise may be wound up, you guys pay out that contract, or do you have conversations with these teams about not offering 2 or 3 year deals? Or
No, we're just saying that the moratorium's lifted on the contract, so people can go and proceed with what they do. If we do end up in a situation where there are less teams than there are, then we'll sit down. It'll be a player-by-player basis. But we're saying to players, we'll give you the certainty of honouring your contract or pursuing early release or whatever you happen to want, to achieve it. In some cases, players may be happy to move to other we don't know. It'll be a player-by-player thing, but we're trying to obviously provide the maximum degree of flexibility to those players. But we have said, in agreement with the Players Association, that moratorium is lifted.
You've got to deal with a number of different broadcasters, and you're trying to organise a competition for next year. So how are those conversations going? Have you got a tournament in place for next year on the 15-team format and dates and things like that?
We're obviously doing a whole series of scenario planning. I mean, obviously, the broadcasters are supportive of the 15-team competition, because that's one of the, and there are obviously many broadcasters involved. That's, I think there are some 13 different broadcasters, and that was obviously one of the processes we had to go through in getting us to this outcome. They're all supportive of a 15-team format, because and that's why they're one of the reasons they were prepared to support us at a similar level of revenue, which allows us to save money, because they see the greater integrity in competition in that format. So, but obviously working through a whole series of scenarios as to what a 15-team competition would look like.
Thanks.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
That's right, no problem. Thanks.